Hello, and welcome to another Storytime with Gabby. Today we will be reading an excerpt out of the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle book, A Study in Scarlet. The lights in the lab were bright, cascading down onto vials and liquids. A man could be seen leaning over a bench, absorbed in his work. He stood suddenly, spinning to face us as the door clanged behind us. His chocolate curls swayed with the movement as his eyes began to roam, inspecting our forms. Stamford stood beside me, curiosity swirling through his eyes as he attempted to inspect the beakers the man was attending to. Stamford cleared his throat, the sound echoing off the walls. The man's eyes lifted to our own, locking with mine. He was tall, taller than the average man. His slender limbs held tension, presumably from his job. His face was godly. His jaw and cheeks seemed to be carved out of stone. They were sharp, strong, yet still able to show soft emotion as they sat high. Some of his features were warm and gentle, a femininity that grazed his demeanour. His hair framed his face nicely. Curly strands that had fallen loose from the styling products hung across his forehead and weaved around his ears, the tips a slightly lighter shade than his roots, reflecting gold in the candlelight. His brows were full and unruly, curling in suspicion as he glanced at us. "Dr. Watson, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said Stamford, introducing us. "How are you?" he said softly, stepping forward to meet us. Sherlock offered his hand, fingers outstretched in an inviting manner. I accepted and shook his hand, the skin soft and warm. "You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." Shock and amusement coursed through my veins at his words. His grip on my hand faltered, eventually slipping away. "How on earth did you know that?" I asked in astonishment. My eyes searched his own, digging to find the emotions they held. Had he researched me? Had Stamford told him prior to meeting me? My mind swirled past every option I could think of, only to be interrupted by his voice. "Never mind," he said, chuckling to himself softly. Cute. It was endearing, how he knew so much. Sherlock turned away, returning to his studies. He began commentating on his actions, informing us of the intricate details of his tests. As hard as I tried, my brain could not focus on his words, instead choosing to focus on the details spread across his face. His brow was furrowed in concentration, mouth moving quickly along with his annotations. He seemed dedicated, and very well informed of his actions. His eyes seemed to almost glitter as he spoke, focused on the vials in front of him. You could see the passion in his mannerisms. His stance, the way his face moved with his words, the quickened rise and fall of his hunched shoulders. It was admirable, in the most personal and intimate sense of the word. "We came here on business," said Stamford, sitting down on a high three-legged stool. I pulled my eyes away from Sherlock as he turned to the voice, seeing instead that Stamford had pushed a stool my way. "My friend here wants to take diggings, and as you were complaining that you could not get anyone to go halves with you, I thought that I had better bring you together." Sherlock glanced between Stamford and myself. His face erupted into a delighted expression at the news, a timid smirk grazing his features. He seemed to almost glow. His face was bright and joyful at this time, eyes wide and eager at the thought of rooming with me. I was intrigued to see how our living together would play out. "I have my eye on a suite in Baker Street," he said, smiling coyly, "which would suit us down to the ground. You don't mind the smell of strong tobacco, I hope?" Sherlock took a step closer, reducing the gap between us. It was from here that I could smell the faint residue of pipe smoke and chemicals, with a hint of cologne. "No, not at all," I muttered faintly, hoping the sound would carry far enough for him to hear. Why did I say it like that? Am I flirting with him? I only object to Rose because my nerves are shaken. His eyes seemed to deepen at this statement, almost pitifully, yet caring. "And I get up at all sorts of ungodly hours." "Do you include violin playing as one of your rows?" he asked, anxiously awaiting an answer. I think he hoped for my answer to be no, though I hoped that if it were a row of mine, he would not count it as a red flag and terminate the relationship. "Friendship?" "Now that depends on the player," I asked, flirty tones running through my voice. "Oh, that's all right," he cried, with a merry and charming laugh. "I think we may consider the thing as settled then. That is, if the rooms are agreeable with you." "When shall we see them?" "Call for me here at noon tomorrow, and we'll go together," he answered, a suggestive tone laced through his words. "Together?" I questioned, my brow raising slightly at his tone. We can go separately if you want," he stammered, a blush rising to his cheeks and up his neck. "I'll be here. Noon exactly," said I. Leaning forward, I placed a chaste kiss to his cheek. Stamford and I turned, leaving a blushing Sherlock amongst his chemicals. I don't think I've ever been so excited to view an apartment. Never judge a book by its cover. A phrase that can be used to explain almost anything you see in this world. But when it comes to sexuality and attraction, there is often much more than meets the eye. Hello, my name is Gabrielle Salfus, and today I will be speaking to you about how queer theory can be used to produce a reading of A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Established in the 1970s as a reaction to the feminist movement, queer theory is a literary approach that focuses on and rejects traditional ideas of gender and sexuality. The study of queer theory examines and evaluates the traditional views and norms surrounding gender identity and sexuality. As queer theory and the LGBT+ community gains popularity and support, theorist Judith Butler believes that the amount of out LGBT people is increasing as a result of that life becoming more thinkable and acceptable. Written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in 1886, A Study in Scarlet is the first novel in which Detective Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson appear. The novel shows the first meeting of the pair, their acquisition of 221B Baker Street, and their first case together. The section of the base text that has been chosen displays the initial meeting of Watson and Holmes, instigated by Watson's friend Stamford. Upon initially reading the base text, Sherlock Holmes and John Watson are portrayed as two straight males looking for a housemate to make the bills manageable. Upon a second and third reading, subtext can be picked out that insinuates that the pair may be interested in each other, such as John's statement that he should prefer a partner to being alone, and Stamford's claim that Sherlock is a little queer. Heteronormativity is a worldwide view on sexuality and the norms surrounding sexual orientation. Norms are rules and expectations that guide behaviour within a society, in particular what we see as normal and acceptable. Heteronormativity is the immediate assumption that someone is heterosexual or straight, and that it is the main or only normal and natural sexuality. This assumption is the reason why LGBT+ people feel the need to come out or reveal their sexuality to their friends and family. When analysing heteronormativity, it is evident that there are two main parties, those who reject the norms and those who enforce them. Rejecting the norms is commonplace for people in the LGBT+ community as they themselves deny the norm of being straight, though heterosexual people can also reject the norms, becoming allies or supporters of the LGBT+ community. Those who enforce the norms are seen as homophobic. Homophobia can be defined as the irrational fear of, aversion to, or discrimination against homosexuality or homosexuals. As the queer, gay, lesbian discourse spreads and gains popularity, awareness, and support, so too does the homophobic movement. From anti-gay advertisements on television and the internet to violent protests and acts of violence, homophobia has become as much of an issue as racism. Homophobia and the enforcement of these norms is not only seen in day-to-day relations and exchanges. In England, civil partnerships between same-sex couples was legalised in 2004, allowing gay and lesbian couples to be themselves in public without the fear of being criminalised. In 2018, it is still illegal to be gay in over 70 countries, 37 of which are in the Commonwealth. Even in countries where homosexuality is legal, there are still those who attack the community, such as the Pulse nightclub shooting. In 2016, a 29-year-old man killed 49 people and wounded 53 others in an attack on a gay nightclub. This made this anti-gay hate crime the second largest mass shooting in recent US history. Rather than agreeing with the heteronormativity implied in the text, the transformation shows the pair is attracted to each other. While their sexuality is not explicitly spoken on, John's active analysis of Sherlock's physical form, the flirty dialogue, and John's farewell kiss insinuate that they are not heterosexual, rejecting heteronormativity. Throughout the initial meeting between Sherlock and John, there are many things that John notices or thinks that imply his interest or attraction, such as seeing Sherlock discussing his discoveries regarding hemoglobin detection and noticing that his eyes fairly glittered as he spoke. Sherlock's delight at the idea of sharing rooms with John, and John's recognition of Sherlock's merry laugh. John is also seen thanking Stamford for setting them up, saying, "This is very piquant. I am much obliged to you for bringing us together." Homoeroticism can be defined as marked by, revealing, or portraying homosexual desire. Homoerotic overtones can be seen in many pieces of work, specifically those that portray two same-sex people as very good friends. Playing on subtext, homoeroticism plays on the viewer's ability to identify similarities between how the friends are portrayed to how relationships and couples are often portrayed in television, media, and text. For example, a pair of friends may be seen bickering over-exaggeratedly, resembling the depiction of an old married couple, or the friends may just be flirting with each other or using flirtatious tones throughout their dialogues. The homoerotic overtones shown between John and Sherlock have been noticed by many, even being a main comic relief point in the BBC television show adaptation of the novels. In the BBC rendition, the housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, is often seen referencing the pair's relationship, asking if they would need just the one room, if they were married yet, and how John seemed to get over Sherlock's death so quickly. In the transformation, John can be seen referencing their relationship as just that, a relationship. If these sections of the text were featured in a conversation between a male and a female, it would be assumed that there is an attraction between the two, eventually resulting in intense sexual or romantic tension or a relationship. In the base text, both characters are perceived as quite masculine, with Sherlock being particularly eclectic. Stereotypes are played on in the novel, with the men being expected to be strong. This is seen when John states that Sherlock's grip strength is a strength for which I should hardly have given credit for, alluding to John's thoughts that Sherlock was not strong enough. As an ex-army doctor, John would automatically be stereotyped as masculine and strong, with typical manly traits, which is supported by the fact that John took his degree of Doctor of Medicine of the University of London and has been struck on the shoulder by a Giselle bullet. He has common views, which is seen when he expresses his shock and slight disgust at Sherlock's past of beating the subjects in the dissecting room with a stick. Stereotyping is a common association with gender norms. Norms, as discussed earlier, are rules and expectations that guide behaviour within a society, in particular, what we see as normal and acceptable. Gender norms specifically can be defined as beliefs about women and men, boys and girls that are passed from generation to generation through the process of socialization. There are many stereotypes associated with men, all of which exhibit strong characteristics and a superiority, especially in the workforce. Typically, men are seen as or supposed to be strong, interested in outdoors and adventurous activities, in higher paying and higher class jobs than women, and are messy, whereas women are typically expected to be soft and compassionate, flirty, responsible for all household tasks, including cooking, cleaning, and looking after the children, and people who are never in charge. Canonically, Sherlock already defies some of these gender stereotypes, with his work being organised, his attitude being withdrawn and quiet, and his lack of strength. In the transformation, these gendered ideas have been reversed for Sherlock, who has been described to have somewhat feminine features and soft, warm hands, both of which are typically associated with femininity. Sherlock is often seen blushing and stumbling over his words in the transformation, actions that are typically associated with being shy, quiet, or reserved, which is what women are typically expected to be. Some of the norms pertaining to relationships, such as the man in the relationship being the one to make the first move, have been played on, as John is the one who confirms their date to view the apartment and kisses Sherlock. John has also been given some typically feminine personality traits, such as his flirtatious attitude towards Sherlock. By altering the base text, an attempt to break the gender and sexuality norms and extract the homoerotic overtones and subtext from the novel has been made. This transformation shows how subtext can be derived from the text to make assumptions and insinuations about the sexuality of characters and their relationships. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learnt something more about queer theory.